March 14th, 1945, at 3:17 in the afternoon, in the blown-out industrial outskirts west of Cologne, Germany, a 24-year-old American corporal named Thomas Brenner pressed his cheek against cold steel and stared through a scope that shouldn't exist. He was a rifleman with the 109th Infantry Regiment, part of the 28th Infantry Division of the United States Army. The air tasted like cordite and burning rubber. In his hands rested a Springfield M1903A4 rifle, standard issue for American snipers, but with one very unusual feature. The scope mounted to it was not regulation. It was something he had built himself from captured German equipment and scrap aluminum salvaged from a wrecked P-47 Thunderbolt. His squad had laughed when they first saw it. A massive artillery telescope stripped down and jury-rigged onto a rifle receiver. Iron rings hand-filed from aircraft metal. A crosshair scratched into glass with a diamond-tipped scribe. It looked absurd. Dangerous, even. They called it Frankenstein. They said Brenner would blow his own eye out trying to aim through 10-power magnification on a shoulder-fired weapon. But now, just 4 minutes later, those same men would watch as a German Panzer IV position more than 1,100 yards away erupted into a fireball that painted the afternoon sky orange and black. The explosion echoed across the rubble. It was not artillery. It was not an airstrike. It was not a bazooka. It was one man, one bullet, and one homemade scope that nobody believed would work. Before we show you exactly how Brenner pulled off this impossible shot, make sure you're subscribed, because the story of how he built that scope and why the Army tried to bury what happened next is something you won't find in any official record. The industrial wasteland west of Cologne in March 1945 was a graveyard of steel and stone. The 28th Infantry Division, known as the Keystone Division for the red keystone patch on their shoulders, had been grinding eastward since crossing the Rohr River in late February. Every kilometer cost blood. The Germans were no longer advancing. They were dying in place, buying time for something. Evacuations, regrouping, delusion, no one was entirely sure. But they were making the Americans pay for every street, every building, every shattered intersection. On March 12th, Brenner's company had taken a small factory complex after 2 days of brutal close-quarters fighting. The cost: 14 men killed, 23 wounded. Among the wounded was Sergeant Howard Mackey, the battalion's senior sniper. A mortar fragment had torn through his shoulder and shredded the scope on his M1903A4. The Unertl 8X scope, a precision instrument worth more than 3 months of a corporal's pay, was destroyed. Glass shattered. Tube bent. Irreparable. Mackey was evacuated. His rifle was handed to Brenner with a terse command: "You're sniper now. Make it count." Thomas Brenner was from Harlan County, Kentucky, a place where rifles were tools, not trophies. He'd been hunting white-tailed deer since he was 9 years old, tracking them through Appalachian hollows where a bad shot meant going hungry. Before the draft found him in 1943, he'd worked as a machinist in a mining equipment shop, fabricating parts for drills and conveyor systems. He understood tolerances, angles, stress points. He could look at a broken machine and see what it needed to become whole again. But when he looked at Mackey's rifle, he saw a problem with no regulation solution. The scope was gone. A replacement request would take weeks, maybe months, assuming supply lines could deliver at all. The Unertl was a scarce piece of equipment. Most snipers were still using the inferior M73 or M84 scopes, if they had optics at all. Brenner didn't have weeks. His company was pushing toward the Rhine, and German resistance was stiffening. Armor was appearing more frequently. Panzers, Stu-GS, half-tracks. The kind of targets that pinned down entire platoons and turned advances into bloodbaths. Iron sights wouldn't cut it. Not at the distances he needed. So on the evening of March 12th, Brenner started walking through the rubble. He was looking for something specific, though he wasn't entirely sure what until he found it. In the basement of a collapsed German command post, beneath a tangle of shattered furniture and rain-soaked paperwork, he discovered a wooden case stamped with Wehrmacht markings. Inside was a ZF-10X artillery observation telescope. The Germans used these for forward observers and gun crews to spot targets at extreme range. It was a beautiful piece of engineering. Carl Zeiss glass, precision ground lenses, 10-power magnification. But it was also massive, designed to be mounted on a tripod, not a rifle. It weighed nearly 4 pounds. The objective lens was 50 millimeters across, twice the diameter of a standard sniper scope. No mounting rings existed for it. No reticle. No eye relief designed for rifle recoil. It was, by every reasonable measure, completely unsuitable. Brenner took it anyway. Over the next 2 nights, he worked in a half-collapsed garage lit by a single kerosene lantern. He disassembled the telescope down to its core components, removing the tripod mount and external housing. He needed it lighter, shorter, more compact. From a wrecked P-47 Thunderbolt that had belly-landed in a field 2 kilometers away, he salvaged 2 sections of aluminum strut. Using a file, a hand drill, and a cutting torch borrowed from a combat engineer, he shaped the aluminum into crude but functional scope rings. The fit wasn't perfect. He packed the gaps with strips of rubber cut from a truck tire inner tube. For a reticle, he scored a precise crosshair into the rear lens using a diamond-tipped scribe he'd carried since his machining days. The horizontal line was dead level. The vertical was plumb true. It took him 6 hours to get it right. When he mounted the scope to Mackey's rifle, it looked like something from a fever dream. The scope tube was thicker than the barrel. The rings were uneven, rough cast. The whole assembly canted slightly to the left, requiring Brenner to shim it with folded paper. When he brought it to the firing line the next morning, the reaction was immediate. "What in the hell is that?" Staff Sergeant Kozlowski asked, staring at the rifle like Brenner had mounted a trombone to it. "That's my new scope, Sergeant. That's a telescope. 10 power. Zeiss glass." Kozlowski laughed. It wasn't cruel, just incredulous. "Brenner, you can't fire a rifle through artillery optics. The recoil will tear that thing apart. And even if it doesn't, the eye relief is wrong. You'll scope yourself." Another rifleman, Private Del Vecchio, chimed in, "Frankenstein. That's what we're calling it. Looks like you stitched it together from dead things." The name stuck. But Brenner didn't flinch. He'd grown up around men who mocked what they didn't understand. He walked 200 yards downrange, propped up a rusted German helmet on a chunk of concrete, and walked back. Then he lay prone, pressed his eye to the scope, and fired. The recoil slammed the scope backward, but the rubber shims absorbed just enough. The helmet flew backward, a clean hole punched through the crown. Kozlowski stopped laughing. "Do it again." Brenner did. At 400 yards. At 600. At 800 yards, he put 3 rounds into a dinner plate-sized grouping on the side of a burned-out truck. The Frankenstein scope held. But Kozlowski still shook his head. "I don't care if it works, Brenner. That's not regulation. You use it in the field. You're on your own if it goes bad." Brenner nodded. "Understood, Sergeant." March 14, 1945. The 109th Infantry Regiment was tasked with clearing a 2-kilometer stretch of industrial road that led to a key bridge over a tributary of the Rhine. Intelligence reported light resistance. The intelligence was wrong. At 2:50 in the afternoon, Brenner's platoon moved through a shattered factory district, advancing in a staggered column along a street lined with the skeletons of warehouses. The lead squad was 30 meters ahead when the Panzer IV opened fire. The first shot was a high-explosive round that detonated against the corner of a building, sending a wave of shrapnel and brick fragments into second squad. 3 men went down immediately. The second shot followed 6 seconds later, punching through the remains of a delivery truck and igniting its fuel tank. The street became an inferno. The Panzer was hull down, positioned behind a low concrete wall at the far end of the road. Only its turret was visible, a squat angular mass of steel that traversed slowly, methodically, picking targets. The range was extreme. Brenner estimated 1,000 yards, maybe more. It might as well have been on another continent. Bazooka teams couldn't get close. Machine gun fire sparked uselessly off the turret armor. The platoon was pinned, bleeding, dying. Lieutenant Hargrove, crouched behind a pile of rubble, shouted over the chaos. "Brenner, can you see it?" Brenner was already prone, the Frankenstein scope pressed to his eye. Through the 10-power magnification, the Panzer was enormous, filling half his field of view. He could see the barrel of the 75mm gun, the commander's cupola, the spare track links welded to the turret front. And behind the turret, strapped to the rear deck, he saw them. 2 cylindrical fuel drums. Jerrycans, the Germans called them. Extra fuel for extended range. A common field modification. They were thin-walled steel, maybe 2 millimeters thick. Vulnerable. "I see it, sir." Can you hit it? Not the tank. But I can hit something on it. Hargrove stared at him. What are you talking about? Fuel drums on the back deck. If I can punch through one, spill fuel on the engine, we might get a fire. Hargrove's face was pale. Brenner, that's 1,000 yards. Through a homemade scope. On a moving target. Tank's not moving, sir. It's dug in. You get one chance. Maybe two. Then that turret turns on us, and we're done. Brenner didn't answer. He was already doing the math. Wind, 8 miles per hour, quartering from the right. Drop at 1,100 yards, 4.30-06, approximately 400 inches. 33 feet. The scope's 10-power magnification gave him clarity, but it also magnified every tremble, every breath, every heartbeat. The fuel drums were maybe 18 inches tall, 12 inches wide. At this range, through the scope, they looked like soup cans. He adjusted the windage, counting clicks in his head. The scope had no turrets, no dials. Every correction had to be held in Kentucky windage, aiming off target to compensate. He aimed 3 feet to the left of the drum to account for wind drift. He aimed high, placing the crosshair on the very top edge of the turret, knowing the bullet would arc and fall. He exhaled slowly. His finger found the trigger. The Springfield cracked. Through the scope, Brenner watched the bullet strike low, impacting the concrete wall 18 inches below the fuel drum. A puff of dust and shattered stone. No penetration. The Panzer's turret began to traverse. The Germans had heard the shot, but they didn't know where it came from. They were scanning, searching. Brenner had maybe 60 seconds. He adjusted. Higher. More windage. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. The second shot was louder in his mind than in reality. The muzzle flash, the recoil, the scope slamming back against his brow. It all compressed into a single moment. And then, through the glass, he saw it. The fuel drum jerked. A small puncture, invisible from 1,100 yards to the naked eye. But through the scope, Brenner saw the liquid begin to pour out, dark and glistening, spilling down the rear deck toward the engine compartment. But fuel doesn't explode on its own. Not without ignition. Brenner's third round was already in the chamber. This time, he loaded a tracer. M1 tracer ammunition, a round with a pyrotechnic compound in the base that ignited on firing and burned white-hot as it flew. The Germans used tracers for observation. Brenner was about to use one as a match. He aimed at the spreading pool of fuel. High again, compensating for drop. Wind right. He fired. The tracer arced across the sky, a glowing line that seemed to hang in the air for an impossible length of time. It struck the rear deck of the Panzer 6 inches from the fuel spill. Sparks erupted, and then the world caught fire. The fuel ignited instantly, a sheet of flame that spread across the engine deck and climbed up the turret. The Panzer's crew, realizing their tank was burning, tried to reverse. But the flames had already reached the engine compartment. Something inside, ammunition, fuel lines, hydraulic fluid, detonated. The explosion was not massive, not Hollywood cinematic, but it was definitive. The rear deck blew outward. Black smoke poured from the turret hatches. The main gun fell silent. 30 seconds later, the crew began bailing out. 3 men stumbling away from the burning wreck, their uniforms smoking. The street went quiet. Hargrove stared at Brenner, then at the Panzer, now a funeral pyre 1,100 yards away. Then back at Brenner. You just killed a tank with a rifle. No, sir. I killed a fuel drum. The tank killed itself. The platoon advanced. The Panzer burned. No one said a word about the Frankenstein scope for the rest of the day. But that night, in the dark ruins of a commandeered building, Del Vecchio approached Brenner with a canteen of liberated schnapps. That thing still looks like Frankenstein, he said, nodding at the rifle. But I guess monsters can be useful. Brenner took the schnapps. Guess so. Thomas Brenner used the Frankenstein scope for another 6 weeks, all the way to the Elbe River. He never received an official commendation for the Panzer kill. The after-action report credited it to coordinated anti-tank fire, a bland phrase that erased Brenner's name entirely. The Army had no category for rifle versus tank. It didn't fit doctrine. It wasn't supposed to be possible. But the men who were there knew. The story spread through the 28th Division, then to other units. By April, riflemen across the European theater were experimenting with captured German optics, trying to replicate what Brenner had done. Most failed. A few succeeded. The improvised scope movement was never official, Never documented, never endorsed. But it happened. In May 1945, as Germany surrendered, Brenner was ordered to turn in his rifle for inspection. A quartermaster sergeant looked at the scope, shook his head, and said, "This isn't regulation." Brenner smiled. "No, Sergeant. It's better." The scope was confiscated, disassembled, and lost to Army paperwork. Brenner never saw it again. He returned home to Kentucky, worked in the mines, raised a family, and rarely spoke about the war. When his grandson asked him about it in 1989, Brenner said only this: "I built something nobody believed in, and it worked when it mattered. That's all." He died in 1992 at the age of 71. No military historians interviewed him. No war museum displays the Frankenstein scope. But somewhere in the collective memory of the men who fought in Europe, the story persists. A story about doubt, ingenuity, and the moment when a homemade piece of glass and metal changed the outcome of a battle. It wasn't in any manual. It wasn't supposed to work. But war doesn't care about what's supposed to happen. It cares about what does. So what do you think? Could ingenuity like Brenner's still matter on a modern battlefield? Or has technology made improvisation obsolete? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story of battlefield innovation inspired you, hit that like button. It helps more history enthusiasts discover these untold moments from World War II. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the decisions, the desperation, and the daring that shaped the war. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told.